Good evening, members. Welcome to this evening's meeting of North West Area Planning Committee. I've just got to find my way back to my prompt for a moment. My name's Councillor Maddie Thompson. I'm the chairman of this committee. Members, please note we're streaming the meeting live as well as recording, and by being present in the meeting, you're giving your consent to being recorded. During each item, please put your hand up to indicate if you wish to speak, and I will then invite you at the appropriate time. Please note that the YouTube live stream sound recording is dependent on the correct use of microphones. Therefore, can I ask, when invited to speak, you remember to turn on your microphone and turn it off when finished. Please reference a page or paragraph number when referring to the agenda papers and keep your contributions as clear and concise as possible. Right, item 2 is the apologies for absence. So may I please have the apologies, Ms Casey?
Yes, Chairman. We've received apologies for absence from Councillors Fleming and Siddle. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Right, item 3 is the minutes. It's recommended that the minutes of the meeting held on the 10th of August and found on pages whatever it is, because I'm afraid I've ended up without a chairman's prompt, be approved as a true and accurate record. Members, can I take those as read? Yes. Right, I so propose. Do I have a seconder? Yeah. And are there any matters of accuracy coming from that? I'll take that as a no. Okay, so can we agree? Pause, please. All agreed? Thank you. Okay, item 4 is declaration of interest to disclose the existence and nature of any disclosable pecuniary interests, other registrable interests and non-registrable interests relating to items of business on the agenda having regard to paragraph 9 and appendix B of the Code of Conduct for members, and members are reminded they're also required to disclose any such interest as soon as they become aware, should the needs arise through the meeting. Members. Councillor Durham.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. So I have an other registrable interest as a member of Essex County Council. I think I've got that one right. I think it's probably an other registrable interest because the applicant is known to me in his capacity because he is a member of Woodham Mortimer Parish Council. So, and he is of a farming family, and I very much doubt that there's anybody here that doesn't know one member of the family around the county, but I'm not on social terms with the applicant, and that's yeah. I mean, it is, as I said, I'm sure everybody knows one of them. It's another big Essex farming family.
Councillor Morgan.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I'm just reiterating what Councillor Durham said. I also know certainly the family of the applicant, or the applicant's family, in terms of his attendance on the Woodham Mortimer Parish Council.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Keys.
Yeah, fairly similar. Coming from a family firm and a haulage company that I used to be involved in. We've probably done haulage for them, but many years ago now, so it's a non-pecuniary interest.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate how complicated this is because the Code of Conduct is so new. To the best of my knowledge, it hasn't been tested anywhere, it hasn't been challenged anywhere, and we don't really know quite where we are. So everyone's declaring everything, which is wonderful. Okay, so we move on to agenda item 5, which is Hall Farm, Malden Road, Woodham Mortimer. We do have a speaker. And could we have the presentation first, please?
Thank you, Chairman. The application seeks planning permission for the construction of a detached annex at Hall Farm. This application follows a previously refused application for an annex at the site under application reference 22/0074/FUL. The previous application was refused in April of this year under delegated authority, as the applicant had failed to demonstrate that the proposal would fall within the annex criteria detailed within the specialist housing need supplementary planning document. The proposal was also considered to result in the spread and intensification of the domestic use at the site to the detriment of the character and appearance of the countryside. The current application has not made any amendments to the proposed location or design of the building, but has provided additional information as part of the design and access statement in an attempt to overcome the previous reason for refusal. This is the site location plan for the application. The site is located on the northern side of Malden Road and is located outside of the defined settlement of Wood and Mortimer within the countryside. This is the proposed block plan for the application, showing that the proposed annex would be situated on an area of land to the northwest of the main dwelling, which is here. For the reasons discussed at section 5.1 of the committee report, this area of land is not considered to be part of the lawful curtilage of the main dwelling. This is the site plan, which shows the location of the proposed building in relation to the main dwelling. As you can see from the line here, shown on the western boundary of the main garden, the area of land which the building would be located is separated by a boundary brick wall, trees and hedgerows. Although access to this area of land can be taken via a small gap in the wall here, the outbuilding is located over 40 metres from the main house as the crow flies. There is also the potential for the site to be accessed from the north here, leading round here to the adjacent commercial site. And for the reasons as discussed within section 5.1 of the report, these site circumstances would mean that the building would not have a clear connection with the main dwelling, and it would be difficult to prevent the proposal from becoming a separate residential unit in the future. These are the proposed elevations of the building, and this is the proposed floor plan. Discussed at paragraph 5.1.9 of the report, the applicants have advised that the proposed building would be used as an office and a home gym by the younger members of the family, but no further details have been provided about the potential occupiers of the building, as they have advised that the building is not proposed to be used for specialist housing accommodation at this time. As no functional link with the main dwelling has been demonstrated, the proposal would not therefore be considered as an annex. These are photographs of the access drive located at the rear of the site where the proposed development can be accessed from. This is a photograph showing the piece of land in which the building would be situated and the dividing wall between the main garden area here and the proposed annex over here. This is another photo showing the location as well as the access to the site from the north. And these are photographs just showing the site in relation to the neighbouring commercial yard and the access as already described here. In line with the assessment carried out within the committee report, it is the officer's position that the applicant has failed to demonstrate that the proposed building would form ancillary annex accommodation and has not met the criteria for annex accommodation as set out within the supplementary planning guidance. Concerns are raised with respect to the distance of the building away from the main dwelling, the potential for the site to be subdivided in the future without a degree of dependency on the main dwelling, and the lack of identification of dependent relatives that would occupy the building. The additional information submitted has not overcome the previous reason for refusal, and the application is therefore recommended for refusal. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. We have a public speaker, that's Kate Jennings, the agent. I'm sure you know the drill. Please make yourself comfortable. Please use the microphone, and you have precisely 2 minutes from when you start to speak.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'd just like to cover a couple of points off for clarity. The garden area was established prior to 2005, as is evident on aerial imagery, and has been regularly used as part of the garden ever since. The access between the two areas of the garden has been in situ for over 17 years, and it's not uncommon for gardens to be compartmentalised or subdivided, and that's the case in this instance, which I don't think the photos do justice to. The applicant would also like to correct that there is no direct access to this site from the north unless you take a long walk along the farm track across the fields and down through between the ponds. Access is proposed through the garden gate next to the house, across the garden patio and across into the lawn. The council admits in the officer's report that their direction with these applications is to refuse where they consider the proposals go beyond what would reasonably satisfy the functional needs of the occupant. The applicant has identified the link will be ancillary and functional. The applicant has 2 young adults living at home, but in addition, the family has 4 elderly parents who are likely to become dependents at some stage in the future. The proposed annex is linked to the family unit and not proposed to be used by anyone other than family who will be dependent on the applicants who reside in the house. There is a clear functional ancillary element to the citing of this proposal, and we do not consider it unreasonable. Just in reference to the High Court case cited by the officer in her report, the Uttlesford Secretary of State case, concurred that separation of the unit is a matter of fact and degree. In fact, in that case, the inspector concluded that the accommodation, whilst a self-contained unit, was intended to function as an annex, with the occupier sharing her living activity in company with the family of the main dwelling. Based on this connection with the main dwelling, there's no reason in law why such accommodation should consequently become a separate planning unit from the main dwelling in the future. It's therefore not a given that every annex will become a separate planning unit and subdivided from the main house, and it's an unreasonable assumption to make in this instance. Understandably, policy set out criteria that would apply in most cases, but judging this as a matter of fact and degree, we don't think it applies.
Sorry, I'm afraid it is missed
Thank you very much.
Same rules for everyone. Thank you. Right, members, if you'd like to ask any questions, begin a discussion, and hopefully out of that a proposal will follow. Councillor Durham, I saw you.
Yeah, thank you. I did call this in, and I apologise to members that I've dragged them in for just a single item on the agenda. But one of the reasons was that both this application and previous ones have been supported by the parish council, obviously with the applicant in absentia. I just take issue with a couple of points about the second access to the north, and as the lady has just said, you know, it's not just out onto a road, you've got to trek across fields, and if you look on Google Earth, as I'm doing at the moment, it is not easily accessible and certainly not separable from the farm. This is very clearly, again, and I'm looking at the Google Earth, it's very clearly within the residential curtilage in appearance, and I understand that there is some discrepancy with whether that is its technical standing, but it is very clearly part of the garden, and this particular building is tucked behind an office block and sort of storage rooms. As far as I can see, it's a single-storey building, which is not very attractive. So in terms of visual impact, there is absolutely none at all, because there's large buildings in front of it. I think in my humble opinion, it's clearly ancillary to the dwelling house, and we should take it on face value that is what it's being applied for, and we can't really take into account what might happen in the future, because we're often told that that would be dealt with under a separate planning application. I just think that this is a well-established, large, multi-generational and Essex farming family, and no doubt there are aged members, and in the due course it may well be required for them to use it. I'm not aware of any immediately, but I just think that on balance, and it is on balance, and I take on board what the officer says, but I'm looking at 5.1.1, which refers to the LDP. It says, however, small unobtrusive extensions of residential curtilage into the countryside, which will not adversely affect the character of the site and the wider countryside, may be approved, ensuring that provision is made for suitable landscaping to ensure boundary treatments are of an appropriate rural character and appearance. And in my opinion, this ticks all of those particular boxes. I accept the fact that there are some of the definitions for specialist needs housing that haven't been ticked, but then there are some that are ticked. So I'm happy to keep an open mind on this, but that is the reason, Chairman, that I brought it forward to this committee.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Keys, then Councillor Morgan, and pause up after.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Councillor Morgan.
Now, being a farmer, this chap is, he could put an agricultural barn up there and wouldn't even have to go through planning permission, which would look, as we look at the photo, not that one, if we could go back a couple of photos, asbestos or concrete asbestos roof or metal cladding, whatever they use now. There we are on the right hand side of the picture, and jump through all the hoops to get that. He could even put some duck up there due to the ponds and all the reservoirs, what they are, without even having to go through planning permission being his agriculture. So, you know, this, from the signs of what I can see here, looks a nice, it's certainly not an eyesore, and I think Councillor Durham stole a bit of my thunder. You'll never be able to see it from the road, as we all know, you know, the house and that, as you drive down the road, it's all been, over the years, it's been diversified into little units at the front of the place, and yes, I personally can't see a problem with it either, and the access, we all know the access, it's nice access, so yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I mean, to be fair, you could have a barn, but you wouldn't be able to live in it. No. Councillor Morgan.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. In terms of the, can I just clarify the situation with regards to an annex? Is its distance from the house that's going to be ancillary? Is that simply, as I say, a question of fact and degree? There's no specific distance that's required. So ultimately, it's a sort of professional or a judgment based on. Right, thank you for that. I mean, I'm just really picking up on Councillor Durham's point. I mean, I'm not clear. I'm not clear, frankly, if the report has actually convinced me that this site is not within the residential curtilage. It's mown. I mean, the fact that there's a wall there, I don't think is relevant, particularly if there's, obviously there's an access there. Many people have walled areas within their gardens, and I think also significant is the pond there, which I think is obviously designed to be part of the sort of a featured amenity of the garden area to the house. So I'm not convinced that, in terms of fact and degree, that being where it is going to be outside of what could be required as an ancillary annex. Going on from that, however, is there a possibility that one could make some form of condition that any such dwelling there is only going to be used by the family that's actually resident at that time? I mean, I know you could put a covenant on there legally, but I'm just thinking from a planning point of view whether there's any such
Mr. Johnson, and perhaps you could cover the curtilage aspect as well, if possible.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. No, I do agree. Some of the matters are fact and degree, that comes through appeal decisions. We do understand that. We take the application in its totality, and we take the totality of that in terms of the policies and the guidance that we apply. Not everything's going to necessarily have all the same weighting, so I do appreciate that. The fundamental position here is that meeting the criteria within the SPD, and one of the fundamental criteria for it being an annex, and therefore, in a way, that type of residential accommodation being granted as an exception, would be to meet the functional need test. That has clearly not been demonstrated. And we have annex applications all the time, I even sometimes get mixed up which one I'm dealing with, because we get so many of them, understandably, in a district of this nature, with the sort of kind of lands we're dealing with. We are quite strict on the criteria. In the vast majority of those cases, the functional need is demonstrated. You have designated persons, in need of a particular sort support, but at the same time want to maintain a certain level of independence. That's normally always demonstrated. We we do not support where, and this has been backed up by a recent appeal decision, which is also set out or indicated in the officer's report, and I do have it here, so can speak to it verbatim if needed, where, you know, the association is vague. Yeah, there may be elderly person somewhere in the site of an age, may or may not, we don't know, yeah? In the cases that we're used to dealing with, they are there, they are identified, their needs are identified. In many cases, it may even be backed up by medical evidence, that sort of thing, yeah? And yeah, that carries a lot of weight. There is no such evidence in this application of that nature. In fact, it's very vague. It says sometime in the future. Who knows what? We can't, in an application like this, we can't just make a decision on sometime in the future, which may or may not happen. When it comes to making an exception in terms of our policies, it has to be quite specific in this case. This has not been met. This is the second application. This second application has not submitted any substantive information apart from a planning permission reference going back to 2011 regarding a two-story extension. There was an opportunity through the reasons for refusal to address the points of the first reasons for refusal. That has not been done. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. I have got you, Councillor Durham, but Councillor Morley hasn't spoken yet, and he's ahead of you.
Thank you.
Councillor Morley.
Councillor Morgan brought up that my question was about the distance between the buildings. You know, is there a definite measurement, and how do you determine if that's in the curtilage or not? You know, it's very difficult when it does look like that. Is there a way that you came or come to that decision?
Yeah. Thank you, Chairman. There is, I mean, there's no distance defined to say this is what it is. Yeah, it is based on fact and degree. But I mean, for example, we get applications where somebody would redline a field as being their, you know, curtilage. I mean, that's clearly not the case. Curtilage in planning terms does tend to mean a definable area surrounding the dwelling, which is relatively contained. You know, I mean, given the fact that, you know, we do have some large gardens, but they're not normally field sized. Yeah, yeah. And in planning terms, that kind of fact and degree assessment is what is recognizable. Yeah. And it's relative to obviously to the size of the plot, the size of the house, and that sort of thing. That's the degree that we make. Yeah. If the thing about planning decisions that we make, obviously people look at these things. They see, well, what precedent has been set by permissions made by the planning authority. Okay, they've allowed the curtilage to be a field. Yeah. So what's the argument against me coming along, presenting my argument? I've got a field. You know, I want to propose something, you know, several hundred meters away because that's the size of the plot. Yeah. Sort of where do you stop? How do you define? This is the professional judgment that we have to apply on a case by case basis. So there is no fixed thing. I mean, the same sort of I mean, obviously, if you've got a residential dwelling in a built up area, it's easy to define the curtilage. Yeah. But when we're talking about large tracts of land, this is where we have to start making the distinctions. These are sites which are adjacent to large fields, maybe woods, commercial areas. These are sort of things. All these are matters that we sort of take into considerations. And when officers come to these decisions and make a decision which includes that element of consideration, those are the factors we take into consideration. Thank you, Chairman.
Yeah. It's just, yeah, that's fine, but just in these particular cases, in particular farming, they are quite family orientated. It's not like any other business, and they do. I mean, my father's 88 and he's still farming. You know, they do go on and on. Luckily, touch wood. I'm just saying.
Sometimes they only smell.
My point is, you have to look at this. I take what you mean. If it was just a big country house, but you can see it's a farm business and a family that have gone on for a long time. It kind of, I think, takes a slightly different slant to it, in my view.
Yes, of course. Right, Ms Duncan.
Through you, Chairman. Also, when we're looking at the curtilage in this instance, it's not just the physical layout that we were looking at, which you do tend to look at garden boundaries, boundary treatments, curtilage being an area close to the house, but we also look at the historic use of the land. So I can get the block plan up if it's easier. This area here is what you'd expect is the ordinary residential garden land in association with the dwelling house. Whether or not that whole area in itself is curtilage, because curtilage is different to garden land. But in terms of looking at the historic use as well as the physical layout, this piece of land was not used as residential garden land until I think the agent said 2005. It started to be mown and rugby posts were put on it from 2005 onwards, but it really started to be incorporated into this garden in 2011 onwards. So we don't just look at the physical layout, which in itself is separate from the main garden. We look at its historic use, and it's such a recent use which hasn't actually benefited from planning permission. So to call it curtilage just because it's been used as garden land within the last 10 years doesn't constitute that it's curtilage. So those are the factors that we looked at in this case. And also I think Councillor Keys, you mentioned about an agricultural building being put on the land. If that was the case as permitted development, then that demonstrates that this piece of land is not residential curtilage. And it was used in association with the original farm until this hedgerow was planted, which I believe was in 2011, but I can check my report. But those are the factors we look at. Thank you.
Right, I can tell you're itching to come back, Councillor Durham, but I have got Councillor White. No, I give Councillor White. Give White to... Thank you. So, Councillor White, and I have got you, Councillor White.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chairman. I've just got the farm up here on Google Earth, and what I'm interested in is that I'm looking at the location, and for me that's definitely garden land. When you look at the rest of it, it's either industrial units or it's farm buildings. There's also no other access really from anywhere else in an easy manner, so it's unlikely to be sold away because there just isn't a simple access to it. It'd be very complicated to get it. Can I just look at the drawings again of what's proposed?
Through you, Chairman. The block plan, the elevations, the floor plan.
The elevations, please. That's it. Yeah. So for me, that's really modest. I mean, I actually think on the balance of probability, it is going to be used for family, and I think it is garden land. I mean, if it's been mowed since 2011, that's a pretty significant time, and it can't be split. You can't sort of look at it and think, well, we'll sell that away. It can't be sold away. And I mean, it's very close to all the new housing developments in Maldon. It's got business units all round it. You're not going to see it. So for me, the benefit outweighs the harm.
Can I? Yeah, thank you,
Yes,
Chairman.
Councillor.
With your forbearance, I think we're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit, aren't we? And we're getting carried away in that it's going to be a residential annex. And I think the application is proposal to create a home gym and office that may be used for occasional overnight accommodation for visiting friends and family. That's its predominant use. So that's clearly that use is linked to the main house. Although it does go on to say that it could be repurposed in the future to provide a granny annex if required, and at this stage it'll still be occupied by family members. So that's a secondary use sometime in the future that may indeed involve another planning application. I don't know, depends on the internal layout. So, I think, it is very clearly in the garden. And I take on board what Mr. Johnson has said in that, when you're applying for an annex to a large country house and it's in a field, that's completely away from the main house, of course, that's absolutely correct. But this is literally a matter of feet from the existing farm office buildings and, very close to the main house. Now, I live fairly close to my aged surviving parent, and if I could get her near to me, I would do that. Nearer to me, I would, but I wouldn't necessarily want her literally a matter of feet, provided that you've got your elderly relative that you can get there within a minute or two if they press an emergency bell, and that could be the other side of the garden. I think we're getting down to, the distance that an annex has to be from the main house. You need to get to it for it to fulfil its purposes, to have an infirm family member in. You need to be able to get to them quickly, but probably not as close as you can hear them when they're shouting at you when they've. So I think you know where I'm coming from. So I totally accept what the officers have said, but I think this is clearly in a garden, whether it is legitimately garden or whatever, but it is, on balance, I think that this would tick the boxes for an office to accommodate a home gym and offices and for with occasional overnight accommodation at this stage in time.
Sorry, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Johnson does
Yeah,
indeed.
thank you, Chairman. And I just wanted to clarify the description of the development. With all due respect, I think what Councillor Durham has discussed in terms of what they want to use the property for is their intended use, home office, gym, etc., and in the future sort of thing. Yeah, the actual description is detached oak framed ancillary residential annex. That will be its definition. Yeah, we will have no control over the internal layout. Yeah, once that description has been applied, that will be its lawful use, for which it can be used for a purpose which it hasn't been demonstrated that there is that functional need in accordance with the SPD, and to which we will then have no further control. Thank you, Chairman.
Well, Chairman, I accept that, and I have to agree to disagree. And I think, on balance, the impact on the local area, the damage to the local area, is insignificant. That we shouldn't worry about it too much. And I'm quite happy if somebody's prepared to second a proposal that we approve this application.
Well, I have got. Well, that I'm not convinced that addresses the reasons for refusal. Or are you, Mr. Johnson? Because you are, after all, the professional. You're the one that matters. If that was a proposal, does it address the? Because that's the important thing. Otherwise, we haven't got something. Yeah.
Thank you, Chairman. I mean, I think, as I said earlier, for me, the fundamental thing is satisfying the policy criteria. We've discussed there are a number of elements where you can apply a fact and degree assessment to, but it has not satisfied the policy element. This is something which carries even beyond the decision that we make here, and this is where we need to be very mindful in terms of the decisions. I'm not sure if Hannah, do you want to say something? Or I wasn't sure.
Oh, not in relation.
No, okay, yeah. So that for me is the fundamental point. What will be taken away from making or supporting a recommendation as proposed by Councillor Durham in terms of how we apply our policies, the robustness of them, the precedent that may be set when other applications come through. These are fundamental things that may challenge us in the future. Thank you, Chairman.
I can leave you to think about that for a
Well,
moment.
Chairman, I'm happy to come back under 5.17, where the SPD criteria. In my view, that the majority of those are we can argue a case to satisfy the majority of those. So I think that we can overcome that particular policy, and that's why my proposal stands.
Right. I believe Councillor Keys was the first to second that. Are you still happy with that? I do have, I won't go straight to a vote because we do still have Councillor Morgan and Councillor White to speak again, and indeed Councillor Stevens. Off you go, Councillor
Sorry.
Morgan.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Right, really, it was just 2 points. The first is that it seems the officers have accepted that this area upon which this thing is going to be sited was actually started to be used as ancillary to the land from 2005 onwards, and indeed from 2011 was being mown as part of the lawn, which to my mind means that in point of fact, if they wanted to make an application for a certificate of lawful use and development as garden land, then that would be possible. That's the first point. But the second point is I reiterate what Councillor Dobbs said in regards to the points 5.1.7, where it seems to me that all those have, apart from the fact that they haven't got an actual occupant designated, and I'm assuming that if they did have, that would presumably all those aspects as being an annex accommodation have been met. Thank you.
Thank you. Right. I've got Councillor White, but something I must add to the proposal, if that's it, that we will need to delegate the conditions and anything to do with RAMs and so on to officers. So as long as we're agreeing on that. Okay, so I have Councillor White and then Councillor Stevens.
Yeah, mine was just a question for clarification. Really, the officer raised a question about the internal layout could be changed, but I understood, and maybe I'm wrong, that they could do what they like with the internal layout, pretty much. I didn't think that we had any control over internal layouts. I knew we did on windows and doors and external, but I thought internal they could pretty much do what they wanted if building regulations don't mind.
Mr. Johnson.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. No, I think I did make mention of that. Thank you.
Right, Councillor Stevens.
So there was just one other small point, just back on what Councillor Morgan was saying. The issues around curtilage, not curtilage, that's garden land, not garden land, that's understandable. But notwithstanding that, even if it were garden land, that is not justification itself for a residential annex. Criteria still have to be met. Just wanted to sort of make that point. I mean, we have residential annex applications. In fact, the appeal reference we made in the officer's report was in a residential garden.
Madam Chairman, I accept that point entirely, but the point is that if one of the reasons for refusal of this annex was that it is non-residential land, so I appreciate that just residential land doesn't mean to say you can automatically have an annex, but one of the reasons that this has been opposed by officers is because they believe it isn't residential land. And if, as I've stated, this has been used effectively as residential land for in excess of 10 years before now, then in my view it is. So that seems to me to rather sort of, frankly, dismiss that particular objection. Thank you.
Okay, let's come to Councillor Stevens. Well, Councillor Stevens hadn't managed a word yet. So.
It's fine, thank you, Chair. I will say what I was going to say, but then I will just ask, is it 10 years or is it 20 years on that point? Thank you.
I thought it was 10.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to clarify that, it's normally 10 continuous years. It's not just a 10-year point in the past, yeah? When an application regarding a change of use over a 10-year or even a 4-year period is submitted, they have to show continuous use, yeah?
Okay.
Thank you, Chairman.
Yeah, please carry on.
And do we have evidence that there has been 10 continuous years of use, please?
Through you, Chairman.
Yep.
We have aerial photographs to show that it was mown from 2011. And at the point of the site visit, there was a washing line situated in that area of land. That is not to say that for 10 years it has been integrated as part of the garden. It's been mown. Prior to that, it was part of the adjacent farmyard. So they haven't submitted.
Rugby post.
Yes, but through you, Chairman, that doesn't necessitate that it's residential garden land. and they haven't demonstrated that it is residential curtilage.
I haven't seen any evidence
I'm
that
going
it
to
was.
question that because I recall another issue in my own village where somebody put football goalposts, and I accept the fact that they're different from rugby, on land that was agricultural, and we enforced against them and they had to remove them. So by putting rugby posts or anything on there, I would say that classes it as garden paraphernalia. And I would think, if it's been initially, yes, and if it has been, that's Home Mill Farm, and so, we can't have our cake and eat it. And, clearly if it was first mown in 2005 and incorporated into the 2011, if you like, closely mown, it certainly wouldn't have been returned to agriculture in the meantime and then re-mown again. So I think that on the balance of probability and with an application for a certificate of lawfulness, of course, the applicant would have to prove beyond all reasonable doubt that it had fulfilled the 10 continuous years. But I think it would be probably more difficult to prove that it hadn't been. Yes, you couldn't farm that little tiny piece because there's yeah, so 2 acres and a cow, exactly. So Chairman, that is the situation. And would we really want to go through the hoop of making the applicant of refusing this, making the applicant apply for a certificate of lawfulness, and then going through this rigmarole again? I don't think that would be seen as being entirely reasonable. That is why, Chairman, I think we discussed this in fullness, and I think, I support Councillor Morgan. In my opinion, apart from having a named person to qualify for the specialist needs housing, it does tick all of those boxes to a certain extent. So those are the reasons for
I think
for
we should
approval.
probably go to a vote, but I do want to check that Councillor Stevens had actually finished. She had not finished her point. I had a
No,
feeling
sorry,
she had.
Councillor Stevens.
So
I
Councillor
apologise.
Stevens, please carry on. And I do have Councillor Miss White's, but if not a reiteration, please, if possible. Councillor Stevens.
Thank you. Okay, well, I'll try not to reiterate, but I probably do want to
I didn't mean
reiterate
you.
and
You're
take it.
still
No, I
on
know
your
you
first
didn't.
go.
I know. I do want to echo some of the things that have been said just to make people really think about them. Okay, so the proof of residential use seems to be a bit of a moot point. I don't know that anyone could prove it either way. I don't think it matters that you can't see it. I don't think that's really the point. The fact that there's a wall there, well, it doesn't really matter. Lots of gardens have walls in them, hedges or whatever, dividing them up, as we've heard. Councillor Keyes referred to what the applicant might build here instead, but that's not what we're considering here, and it wouldn't be residential, as Councillor Thompson said. But above all, it isn't an annex, and as we've heard, it doesn't meet the functional test. It would be a building that could evolve into a separate dwelling house, and that's what our policies are meant to rule out. And every time we go against those, we're exposing ourselves to the risk that all the other areas where there's a bit of pocket of land here and there, or well, let's make it into a garden, and when nobody notices, then we can put something on it, and then in time, well, we might have elderly parents living in here, or actually that track that comes in from the north, it's not up to much now, but it could be in the future. The fact that it could be accessed independently from the main house really does emphasise this for me. It could evolve into a separate dwelling house, and for that reason, I don't think we should approve it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor White, a new point?
Yes, it was really. I mean, I was just looking at it thinking that for me, an oak frame building complies with policy D1 on design. That was just something that I was thinking. So, and sympathetic materials sits well in the landscape, etc.
Thank you. Yes, let's have the vote. So we have a proposal in the name of Councillor Durham, seconded by Councillor Keyes. Ms Casey, have you got that? Are you happy you've got the wording of that?
Yes, it's largely around the compliance with section 5.1.7, with
Okay.
the criteria, section 5.1.7.
Okay, thank you. Right, in that case, and as I said earlier, delegating the conditions, etc., to officers. So those in favour of that proposal to approve? Those against? Okay. That proposal passes, the application is refused. So moving on to our last item, and you'll be very pleased to...
The application is refused or approved?
It's approved, sorry, it's approved. What did I just say? It's approved, I'm sorry, it's been a long day. It is approved in line with Councillor Durham's proposal. All right, you'll be very pleased to hear there are no items of urgent business that the chairman has considered, and I close the meeting with thanks to officers and members and anybody out there who's listening at 8:14.